A day after admitting he made a mistake dismissing questions about Donald Trump, the Prime Minister offering new aid to industries he may have offended.
We must protect our workers and our industries who are most exposed to U.S. tariffs.
Mark Carney further limiting the amount of foreign steel coming into Canada at a lower tariff rate.
We will absolutely make sure that there are steel and aluminum and sometimes, depending, lumber requirements, because we need to protect jobs in these tariff sectors.
Canada just drew a hard steel line across North America. In a single sweeping announcement, Ottawa unveiled powerful new steel protection measures that rewrite who gets to supply steel in this country and who no longer will. And if Donald Trump believed Canada would quietly endure his tariffs, this week proved the opposite. Canada is fortifying its steel market, defending its steel workers, and reclaiming control of an industry the U.S. tried to destabilize. Prime Minister Mark Carney has launched a major realignment of Canada's steel economy, responding directly to the intensifying wave of U.S. tariffs that have hit Canadian mills since early 2025. According to real-time reporting from Reuters, CBC, AP, and Global News, the federal government is moving to curb foreign steel, prioritize Canadian steel in construction, and boost steel producers through new financing tools, freight subsidies, and tighter enforcement against steel dumping. Under the new framework, Canada will drastically reduce tariff-free steel imports from non-FTA countries compared to 2024 volumes, cut back privileged access for other suppliers, end temporary tariff remissions by the start of 2026, and impose a global 25% tariff on targeted steel-derived goods, such as wind towers, prefabricated structures, wire products, and fasteners, a market valued at roughly $10 billion. The government will also implement a nationwide Buy Canadian requirement for any federal contract over $25 million, ensuring major infrastructure projects use domestic steel. Freight rates for intraprovincial steel shipments will be cut in half, supported by direct funding to major rail carriers. And a strengthened compliance force inside the Canada Border Services Agency will focus specifically on preventing steel dumping and false origin declarations. This bundle is not a symbolic tweak, it is a structural reshaping of Canada's steel economy, a steel shield built at a moment when steel workers need the support the most. For years, Canada has lived under the shadow of U.S. trade attacks, especially in steel. Each time Washington revived Section 232 national security tariffs or tightened its Buy American rules, Ottawa found itself racing to limit the fallout. But with Trump's return to the White House and his renewed focus on punitive steel tariffs, Canada is no longer content to react. Carney's measures show a country drawing strength from its own steel capacity and refusing to let its industrial foundation erode under U.S. pressure. By building demand at home and protecting steel from volatile import surges, Canada is saying clearly that steel is not just another commodity. Steel is strategic, steel is sovereignty, and steel is worth fighting for. Trump's expanding steel tariffs were intended to repatriate production and weaken foreign competitors. Instead, the tariffs hollowed out integrated supply chains, collided with refinery and manufacturing realities, and pushed Canada to build its own steel protections. This is the political irony of the moment. Trump struck the first blow in steel, but Canada is the one using it to strengthen its long-term industrial independence. Canadian mills in Hamilton, Sault Ste. Marie, and Regina have faced years of uncertainty from unpredictable U.S. policy. These new measures replace uncertainty with structural support. If Washington won't offer stability, Canada will create it. Behind this policy is a very real economic urgency. Steel companies across the country have been forced into layoffs in 2025 due to tariff distortions and the collapse of long-standing export channels. Industry leaders warned Ottawa that without decisive action, a sector employing tens of thousands of Canadians could suffer irreversible damage. Carney's steel push is more than politics. It is a recognition that steel workers cannot build careers, plan their futures, or invest in their communities if their industry is constantly exposed to foreign manipulation. Steel needs a predictable home base, and Ottawa is finally providing it. The most transformative element of this entire package is the new Buy Canadian requirement for federal projects. It doesn't just adjust procurement rules, it rewires the entire industrial map of the country. From now on, every major federally funded bridge, port expansion, transit corridor, and national housing build will be anchored by Canadian steel. This instantly turns the federal government into the single largest and most reliable customer for domestic mills, giving the sector stable, long-term demand that no private market cycle can replicate. It mirrors the logic behind Washington's Buy American laws, but it finally gives Canada a strategic steel doctrine of its own. With these measures in place, Canada now stands to retain an estimated $1.5 to $2 billion of steel demand that previously leaked out through import dependence. The 50% freight rate reduction keeps tens of millions more inside Canadian mills instead of being burned away in transportation costs. And the shift in procurement direction means U.S. steel producers, who once held a deep and automatic position in Canada's market, are now poised to lose roughly $400 to $600 million of annual access. In other words, the steel advantage that Washington enjoyed for decades is slipping, and Canada is reclaiming its share by redirecting major national projects back toward its own workers and its own industrial base. This is more than procurement policy. It is a declaration that Canada intends to control the future of its steel economy, and that the era of relying on unpredictable U.S. supply chains is over. Internationally, the timing is no coincidence. At APEC 2025 and during bilateral talks with major Asian and European partners, Carney emphasized the importance of diversifying Canada's trade landscape and reducing vulnerability to U.S. disruptions. By taking decisive control of the steel file, Canada is showing global investors it will not allow its strategic sectors to be weaponized by foreign politics. This also improves Canada's negotiating position. Countries respect partners that protect their own industries. Canada's steel measures send a clear message. This country is serious about industrial sovereignty, and it will defend its steel sector with the same conviction Washington uses to defend its own. American officials have not re-engaged in steel tariff talks despite repeated signals from Ottawa. The Trump administration remains fixated on reshoring production to U.S. facilities, leaving little incentive to negotiate with Canada. That silence has forced Ottawa to stop waiting for relief and start building its own steel reality. If Washington will not open the door, Canada will weld its own frame. The steel measures introduced this week are the foundation of that new structure. Canada's new steel protections mark a defining moment in the country's industrial reinvention. For the first time in years, Ottawa is not trying to preserve an old North American balance. It is forging a Canadian one, built on Canadian steel, Canadian workers, and Canadian control. Canada is proving that steel strength is not measured in rhetoric. It is measured in policy, resilience, and the willingness to defend your economic core. Trump's tariffs triggered this confrontation. Canada's steel strategy is how Ottawa wins it. And now the question is unavoidable. If Canada is ready to defend steel this aggressively, what other sectors will receive the same steel-strong approach?
One of the messages today we were saying, say hi, is we put in the budget, Minister of Housing, all this, your MP, the MP for a reason, of course the mayor here, but we've got $25 billion in the federal budget to scale projects like this across the country.
Canada's housing crisis just witnessed a rare shift. Not a political promise, not a policy teaser, but a real physical transformation already rising from the ground. Prime Minister Mark Carney's tour of a major Ottawa build site sent a clear signal. Canada is done debating whether to build. The construction phase has officially begun, and the scale is national. This wasn't a podium speech, it was a hard hat moment. Carney walked through a geothermally powered development and emphasized that heating in these units would cost about $200 a year thanks to passive house standards. That single line captured the government's mission: long-term affordability built directly into construction. Carney's visit centered around an advanced affordable housing project in Ottawa, designed with deep geothermal pillars, ultra-efficient insulation, and thick life-cycle construction. The project showcases not just new homes, but a new philosophy. Affordability is not only about rent, it's about lifetime operating costs. As he walked the grounds, the Prime Minister met apprentices, engineers, and union workers. He highlighted a series of major commitments from the most recent national budget. First, an unprecedented $25 billion national housing program to scale similar projects across the country. This fund focuses on accelerating construction, subsidizing innovative building technologies, and ensuring cities have the support needed to approve large-scale developments. Second, the creation of a federal land bank, consolidating federal properties under the Minister of Housing to dramatically speed up approvals. This includes old government buildings, surplus lots, and unused institutional land. The objective is simple: eliminate the costliest stage of development, land acquisition, and streamline zoning with cities. Third, a massive expansion of training programs for skilled trades. Carney acknowledged that the housing crisis is not only a policy failure, but a labor capacity problem. With Canada facing shortages in plumbers, electricians, pipe fitters, and machine operators, the government plans to expand apprenticeships, union partnerships, and post-secondary training. The message on the ground was direct. This is not a one-off project. This is the template for the next decade of construction. What separates this from previous governments' housing plans is the presence of actual ongoing construction. For years, Canadians have heard about historic investments. Today, the difference is visible. Geothermal shafts bored 400 feet below ground, cranes already in motion, and workers actively building. Carney's appearance at the site matters politically. It signals a shift from policy language to operational leadership, something his critics often said was missing in federal housing strategy. The focus on passive house efficiency reinforces a broader economic message. Affordability is inseparable from energy efficiency, and energy efficiency is inseparable from long-term stability for families. A home that costs $200 per year to heat and cool speaks louder than any press release. Housing remains the defining political issue in Canada. No budget, no foreign policy move, no domestic reform draws public attention like the price of a home. Carney's budget is his biggest gamble yet, and this site visit is his attempt to demonstrate that the federal government is actually delivering, not just planning. His opposition argues that Ottawa has moved too slowly, or that it has overcomplicated the process with layers of bureaucracy. The Prime Minister's strategy here is to shift public perception by showing that physical proof of progress already exists. If more sites across the country look like this one in Ottawa by next summer, the political narrative could shift dramatically. This element of the plan has not received enough attention. Federal land, including high-value parcels in major urban centers, has long been trapped in a cycle of underuse, outdated administrative rules, and painfully slow redevelopment timelines. By consolidating these assets under a single housing-focused authority, the government is attempting to unlock two of the biggest structural barriers in Canada's housing market: the scarcity of buildable land in major cities and the zoning delays that routinely drag projects out for years. If the new federal land bank functions as intended, those multi-year approval timelines could shrink to just a matter of months, fundamentally reshaping the economics of building homes and finally giving developers room to move at the pace the crisis demands.
Money and land are meaningless without workers. Carney's direct emphasis on trades training is a recognition of a reality developers know too well. Canada simply cannot build its way out of this crisis with the current workforce. This is where the government's approach becomes more holistic than previous attempts. Expanding apprenticeship pathways helps new workers enter the field. Deepening partnerships with unions ensures training aligns with real labor needs. Working with colleges means that young Canadians can enter stable, highly paid careers without relying on university degrees. It's a long-term fix, but without it, no national housing strategy can succeed.
This announcement also lands against a turbulent backdrop south of the border. Under President Donald Trump's expanded tariff regime, construction materials in the United States have become significantly more expensive. Lumber, steel, appliances, and heavy equipment have all faced cost spikes as U.S. homebuilders warn about slowdown in price inflation. Canada, by contrast, is trying to shield itself from global cost shocks by embedding efficiency into construction. Passive house designs reduce energy demand. Geothermal systems reduce dependency on fossil fuels. Long-life materials reduce maintenance burdens. It's an economic and climate strategy disguised as a housing plan, and one that could make Canada more resilient than the U.S. in the long run. The Ottawa build is not the largest construction project in the country, nor is it the most glamorous, but it represents something Canada has struggled with for years, a template that works. This model, efficient design, low heating costs, modular scalability, and predictable timelines, is exactly the type of project that could be replicated from Vancouver to Halifax. It's practical, not experimental. It uses proven technologies, it links affordability with sustainability. And politically, it shows Canadians that visible progress is not just possible, it's happening. Carney's site visit offers a glimpse into a government finally shifting from talk to action. With $25 billion committed, a federal land bank mobilized, and training expansions underway, Canada is beginning to build the capacity required to meaningfully address its housing crisis. Will it be enough? That depends on speed. If these projects roll out quickly, if more cranes appear, more land is unlocked, and more workers are trained, this could become the signature achievement of the Carney era. If delays persist, public frustration will remain high. But one thing is clear, the housing transformation is no longer theoretical. It's being poured in concrete, drilled into geothermal pillars, and built by the hands Carney met on that Ottawa site. The crisis is far from over, but for the first time in years, the direction has changed.
It's the same thing with the auto sector. He promised that he would negotiate a win. He promised to get a rapid deal. Still no win, still no deal. Elbows gone missing, and so are the...
We have the best deal with the Americans of any country. We have the lowest tariff on our automobiles and trucks of any country, but we are not satisfied. That is why we are negotiating a new accord on steel, on aluminum, on energy, and on auto.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
The room was tense, the echoes of Parliament filled with the sound of frustration and defiance. Across the aisle, the opposition leader launched a furious attack, accusing the Prime Minister of failing Canada's auto workers. He claimed that thousands of jobs were gone, that the promised deal with Washington never came, and that the government had simply given up. The Prime Minister stood, calm and steady, refusing to take the bait. His words were measured, confident. He said Canada already had the lowest auto tariffs in North America, and that new agreements on steel, aluminum, energy, and vehicles were underway. The noise in the chamber grew, but he didn't waver. That exchange was more than political theater. It was a snapshot of a country wrestling with identity, a test of whether Canada could hold its industrial ground as the United States turned inward. What began as an argument over auto jobs quickly became something larger, a question of national direction and dignity. In recent months, Canada's auto heartland has endured blow after blow. Two major events reshaped the conversation. First came Stellantis, moving Jeep Compass production from Brampton, Ontario to Illinois, investing about $13 billion in new facilities across the border. That single decision created roughly 5,000 American jobs, but erased 3,000 Canadian ones. Then came General Motors. The company halted production of its BrightDrop electric vans at the Cami plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, leaving another 1,200 workers without employment. Together, those two announcements wiped out more than 4,000 auto jobs within 2 weeks. The opposition seized the moment, calling it proof that the government's strategy had failed. In Parliament, the accusation was simple. Promises were made, jobs were lost, and confidence was fading. But the Prime Minister's answer carried a different tone. He spoke not only about recovery, but about restructuring, about how Canada would rebuild an industry no longer tied to decisions made in Washington. Behind the political noise was a new reality. The North American auto sector was shifting, and Canada was determined to write its own next chapter.
In the days following the debate, the outlines of Ottawa's industrial plan became clearer. Rather than retaliate against U.S. tariffs or chase short-term deals, the government began to reshape the entire manufacturing ecosystem. Officials from the Industry and Natural Resources Ministries confirmed that Canada was pursuing what they called a sectoral rebuild. The plan had three main pillars. First, diversify production chains. Canada is working with Mexico, the European Union, Japan, and South Korea to ensure that auto parts, batteries, and raw materials are not dependent on one source. Second, build domestic value chains. New federal and provincial programs are supporting investments in Ontario and Quebec to strengthen local parts production, EV battery assembly, and critical mineral refining. Third, negotiate focused agreements on individual sectors, especially steel, aluminum, and energy, to guarantee stable pricing and long-term access to key inputs. Industry analysts at Statistics Canada noted that even small policy shifts can determine where automakers locate new investment. A clear industrial direction can anchor thousands of high-skilled jobs for decades. The Prime Minister's approach is not to fight with tariffs or slogans, but to outplan the problem, to make Canada indispensable within North America's manufacturing web. It was a strategy built quietly, but its intent was unmistakable. If Washington wanted to play power politics, Ottawa would respond with design, not anger.
When the debate returned to Parliament, the clash had evolved. The opposition leader positioned himself as the voice of frustrated workers, angry, direct, appealing to those who had seen factories go dark. He painted the government as detached from reality, arguing that while politicians talked of accords, families were losing paychecks. The Prime Minister, meanwhile, framed the issue around teamwork and strategy. There's no I in team, he reminded the House, turning the line of mockery into a statement of purpose. To his supporters, it wasn't about wordplay. It was a declaration that Canada's path forward depended on unity, not isolation. Observers noted that beneath the theatrics, the two men represented two visions of the economy, one rooted in resentment, the other in resilience. Poilievre's rhetoric resonated with those tired of rising costs. Carney's calm response, however, mirrored a broader shift, away from dependence on the United States and toward a more self-reliant model. Across news panels and economic briefings, the message grew clearer. The true opponent in this debate wasn't sitting across the aisle. It was sitting in Washington. Trump's industrial tariffs had redrawn the map of North American production. Now, Ottawa's challenge was to turn that disruption into an advantage. In that sense, the Prime Minister's duel in Parliament wasn't just political defense. It was economic positioning. Every answer he gave, every statistic he cited, was part of a larger narrative, one where Canada could survive and even thrive without waiting for permission from its southern neighbor.
The auto sector debate revealed more than a policy dispute. It captured how pressure can create power. Canada has endured plant closures, layoffs, and political attacks, but beneath those struggles, something new is forming. Government data from the Department of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development show that industrial investment commitments in Ontario and Quebec rose by over 9% in 2025, even as cross-border tensions grew. Exports of EV battery components increased modestly in the second quarter, and new private sector consortia have begun forming around domestic mineral supply. These are small signals, but they mark direction, not decline. Meanwhile, the United States faces its own contradictions. Trump's tariff policies were designed to bring jobs home, yet they have fractured long-standing supply chains, raised input costs, and driven allies to adapt in ways Washington did not expect.
For every American job gained, others in logistics and parts manufacturing have faced uncertainty. In contrast, Canada's slow and deliberate restructuring may prove more durable. It aims to keep industrial ecosystems alive, even if some production shifts abroad. That's why the debate in Parliament mattered so much. It wasn't only about defending past jobs, it was about defining future ones. As the session closed, the cameras caught a moment of quiet. The Prime Minister's sitting back, expression steady, while the chamber still buzzed with noise. He had faced a storm and held his line. The message to Canadians and perhaps to Washington was unmistakable. The country would not retreat into bitterness or blame. It would adapt, coordinate, and rebuild on its own terms. Trump's tariffs may have reshaped the continent, but they also awakened a new resolve north of the border. The confrontation that began over lost auto jobs might one day be remembered as the moment Canada found its industrial voice again, steady, confident, and ready to stand on its own.
Recently, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a forceful performance at a press conference in London. The moment came when a reporter pressed him with the criticism that he was simply flying around the world without achieving anything concrete.
Conservatives say you are jetting around but getting nothing done. You've met with numerous leaders while you've been here, but you're not signing a new deal or announcing a new partnership. What have you achieved tangibly for Canadians during this trip?
Instead of avoiding the question, Carney pointed to new trade deals, fresh partnerships, and meetings with global investment leaders.
We are focused on building a new web of trade relationships around the globe. In June, Canada signed the EU Strategic Partnership for the Future to deepen trade and mutual economic security. Last week in Mexico, I worked with President Sheinbaum to launch a new Canada-Mexico action plan to build fresh economic opportunities for our workers and businesses. Now, while in the UK, I've met with business and investment leaders to discuss new economic opportunities and partnerships as we look to attract capital to Canada.
What looked like a challenge quickly turned into a showcase of strategy. At the very moment Washington is erecting trade barriers, Canada is presenting itself as an open destination for capital and new alliances. This scene matters because Canadians at home are anxious. Jobs are being threatened by U.S. tariffs, and many families are worried about rising costs. Carney's response in London was aimed not only at the journalist in the room, but also at those Canadians who want reassurance that their government is acting with urgency and direction. Carney emphasized that Canada is not waiting for opportunity to arrive at its door. In London and New York, he met with some of the world's largest infrastructure funds, the type of global investors that finance projects from energy to digital networks. His message was simple. Canada is building a modern economy and needs hundreds of billions of dollars in investment over the next decade. Ottawa has already taken steps to back that ambition. In its first 4 months, the government cut personal income taxes for more than 22 million Canadians and reduced capital gains taxes. It removed federal barriers to interprovincial trade to create what Carney calls one Canadian economy. It passed legislation to fast-track approvals for energy, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, and trade infrastructure. And it launched Build Canada Homes to double the pace of residential construction. These policies, coupled with outreach to investors, are meant to attract capital that might otherwise hesitate in today's uncertain climate. While President Trump is pursuing tariffs that unsettle markets, Canada is telling investors that it offers stability, predictability, and the chance to grow long-term careers for Canadian workers. For investors, the signal is clear. Canada is not only lowering domestic barriers, but also promising access to growing export markets. International funds are increasingly drawn to places where governments act quickly to approve projects and provide clarity on taxation. By placing these reforms front and center, Carney is sending a message that global capital is welcome and will be safeguarded.
Beyond capital flows, Ottawa is widening its trade horizons. In September, Canada signed its first bilateral trade agreement with an ASEAN country. The deal with Indonesia reduces or eliminates tariffs on 95% of Canadian exports to a nation of more than 270 million people that is projected by the International Monetary Fund to become the fifth largest economy in the world within 2 decades. Days earlier, Carney launched the Canada-Mexico Action Plan, setting a path for joint economic initiatives as both countries prepare for the scheduled review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. In Europe, Canada signed a strategic partnership for the future in June, and negotiations are already in a second phase. The framework is linked to Europe's new SAFE initiative and the Rearm Europe plan, both of which involve hundreds of billions of euros in infrastructure and defense spending. Each of these steps moves Canada further from reliance on a single market. Trump's tariffs were designed to pressure Ottawa, yet in practice they have accelerated Canada's turn toward Asia, Europe, and Mexico. What was meant to isolate has instead pushed Canada to diversify. The contrast is striking. In Washington, new tariffs are being announced on pharmaceuticals, furniture, and heavy trucks, creating fresh waves of uncertainty. In London, Carney is describing a Canada that is opening new doors, signing deals, and presenting itself as a partner for the future. A question that might have put him on the defensive instead became an opportunity to underline a broader message. Canada is not shrinking under pressure. It is using that very pressure to expand its reach, reduce its dependence, and strengthen its economy. For Canadians, the outcome of these moves will be measured in jobs, investment, and long-term security. For the United States, it is a reminder that trade wars often come with unintended consequences.